I fired her on a Thursday. He told me he loved her on a Sunday. What he never knew is that I had been watching both of them for 10 weeks, and by the time he opened his mouth, I had already won. Let me tell you how that happened. The morning Marcus told me he was leaving, I had already been awake for 2 hours, not because I sensed something was coming. Because I had a board presentation at 8 and a vendor call at 10 and a hiring decision I had been putting off for 3 weeks. That was my life. That had always been my life. He found me at the kitchen counter, still in my robe, laptop open, reading glasses on, halfway through my second coffee. He stood in the doorway for a moment before he spoke, and I remember thinking he looked like someone who had been rehearsing something. "I need to talk to you," he said. I closed the laptop. I took off my glasses. I gave him my full attention, which, if I am being honest, was something I had not done in a long time. "I think we've grown apart," he said. "I need to be honest with you. There's someone else." I looked at him for a long moment, and then I said very quietly, "Is it Vanessa?" He went completely still, and I knew. What he did not know, what I had never told him, was that Vanessa had cleaned out her desk 4 days earlier. I had made sure of that long before he ever walked into that kitchen. I need to take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. Marcus and I met when I was 27. He was 30, working in sales for a company that was slowly going under, charming in the way that men are charming when they have not yet been asked to be anything more than charming. I was finishing my MBA, working 60-hour weeks, already being looked at for a management track. I thought the difference in our ambition was temporary. I thought he was still finding his footing. I told myself a lot of things in those early years that I no longer believe. We got married when I was 29. By then, I was already outpacing him professionally, and we both knew it, but we never said it out loud. That silence became the foundation of our marriage. I would come home from 12-hour days and ask about his work and listen carefully and never once say what I was thinking, which was that I was carrying almost everything and it was getting heavier every year. He was not a bad man. I want to be clear about that. He was not cruel or cold or absent in the obvious ways. He just never grew, and I never stopped. By the time I was 34, I was the CEO of a company I had helped build from 40 employees to nearly 100. Marcus was managing a small fitness studio 3 days a week. I paid the mortgage. I paid for the vacations we took every year because I thought that if we kept moving, kept experiencing things together, the distance growing between us would somehow close itself. I paid for the dinners and the car and the home renovation we did the year before everything fell apart. I paid for all of it, and I never once threw it in his face because I did not think that was what love was supposed to look like. Maybe that was my mistake. Not the money, the silence. Vanessa joined the company 14 months before everything ended. She came recommended, sharp resume, confident in her interviews, exactly the kind of person we needed in the role. I hired her myself. I remember thinking she was going to be an asset. For the first few months, she was. I noticed something shift in Marcus around month 4. It was subtle at first. He started asking questions about work in a way he never had before. Not general questions, the polite kind, the kind you ask when you are not really listening. Specific questions. Who was on my team? Which events I was attending? Whether I had hired anyone new recently. I thought at the time that he was finally becoming interested in my world. I was grateful for it. I was wrong about what it meant. The moment everything changed for me was a Sunday in October. I had flown out Thursday for a 2-day conference that got cut short. Canceled sessions, venue issue, everyone sent home a day early. I landed at 6 in the evening and took a cab straight home. I remember looking out the window of the cab and feeling something close to relief. I had missed him. Despite everything, despite the distance that had been growing between us for years, I had missed him and I was glad to be coming home early. His car was in the driveway. The front light was off, which was strange because he always left it on when he was home at night. I let myself in quietly, thinking maybe he was asleep on the couch. The house was silent, but it was the wrong kind of silent. Not empty, staged, like a held breath. I stood in the entryway for a moment, just listening, and then I heard him come to the top of the stairs. He looked down at me and something crossed his face before he controlled it. It was fast. Most people would have missed it. I did not miss it. "You're back early," he said. His voice was even. His eyes were not. He came downstairs, said he had been home all day, said he was tired, kissed me on the cheek, and went to pour himself a drink. I stood in the entryway with my suitcase still in my hand, and I looked at the couch. The cushions were slightly off. A glass on the coffee table that he had not mentioned. A window in the hallway that was open an inch when we never opened that window. I picked up my suitcase. I carried it upstairs. I unpacked it slowly and carefully and hung everything back in the closet, and I did not say a word. I showered. I got into bed. He came up 20 minutes later, kissed me goodnight, rolled to his side, and fell asleep with a speed that told me his conscience was not keeping him awake the way mine suddenly was. I lay in the dark next to him, and I stared at the ceiling, and I felt the relief I had felt in the cab drain out of me completely. In its place was something colder, quieter, a kind of clarity I had never felt before and have never forgotten since. I was not going to react. I was not going to confront him on a feeling. I was going to be certain before I did anything at all. The next 10 weeks were the hardest of my life. Not because of the investigation, because of the pretending. Every morning I got up and made coffee and asked him how he slept. Every evening I came home and asked about his day, and listened to his answers and looked for the gaps and filed them away. I sat across from him at dinner and watched him lie to my face with a smile, and I smiled back, and I said nothing. There were nights when I sat in my car in the parking garage at work and I just breathed, counted to 10, reminded myself what I was doing and why. There was one night, a Wednesday in November, when I had driven halfway home and I pulled over on the side of the road because I could not see through what I was feeling. I sat there for 40 minutes. I cried in a way I had not cried since my father died. Not for the marriage, though that too. For the version of myself that had loved him so completely and so quietly for so long. For all the mornings I had left before he woke up, and all the evenings I had come home to find him exactly where I had left him, and told myself that was fine, that this was just a season, that we would find our way back to each other. I cried for her, that woman who had believed that. And then I wiped my face, started the car, and drove home. I hired a private investigator in week 6. By week 9, I had everything I needed. Photographs, timestamps, a paper trail that told a story he would never be able to explain away. During those same 10 weeks, I had also been paying very close attention at work. And what I found had nothing to do with Marcus and everything to do with Vanessa herself. Expense reports. 3 of them, spread across 5 months, small enough to stay under the threshold that would trigger automatic review, large enough to be meaningful when you laid them side by side. It was deliberate. She was good at it. She just was not good enough. I brought it to HR with full documentation. We followed every protocol exactly as we would for any employee. Vanessa was terminated for cause on a Thursday morning. She was escorted out at 10:45 with a box of her things and her access card on the security desk before 11. Marcus did not find out until that evening. I know because I was watching. He tried calling her twice during dinner. I watched him go still when the calls did not connect. I watched him excuse himself to check his phone in the hallway. I watched him come back to the table and finish his meal in silence. I said nothing. I passed him the bread. I asked him how his day was. He said fine. 3 days later, he stood in the kitchen doorway and told me there was someone else. When I said her name and watched the blood leave his face, I think he finally understood that he had never been as careful as he thought he was. He asked me how I knew. I told him it did not matter. He asked me what I had done to her. I told him I had protected my company from someone who had been stealing from it, which was true, and entirely my job to do. He stood there for a long time trying to find something to say and coming up empty. Then he went upstairs and packed 2 bags and left. What followed was not dramatic in the way people imagine these things are. There was no screaming. There were no long phone calls full of accusations. There was just my attorney and 7 years of financial records, and a very clear picture of who had contributed what to the life we had built together. Marcus had an attorney too. His attorney was good. Mine was better. And the records did not lie. The house was mine. The investments were mine. The account we had built together was funded almost entirely by money I had earned. He walked away with his car, his personal savings, and significantly less than he had been counting on. The divorce was finalized 4 months later on a Tuesday. I signed the papers in my office between meetings. My assistant brought me a coffee, and I sat for a few minutes looking out the window at the city below before my next call came in. I thought about that woman on the side of the road in November. I thought about how far she had carried herself to get to this moment. I felt something that was not quite pride and not quite peace, but was somewhere close to both. I think about those 7 years sometimes. Not with anger, though the anger was there for a while. Not even with sadness anymore, though the sadness lasted longer than I expected. What I think about is the silence. All the things I did not say because I was trying to protect him. All the mornings I left before he was awake and came home after he was asleep, and told myself that this was just a season. I think about how careful I was with his pride, and how little care he took with mine. He mistook my patience for weakness. He mistook my silence for not noticing. He looked at everything I had built and assumed that because he was standing next to it, some of it must belong to him. He was wrong about all of it. This story was submitted by one of our viewers. Names and details have been changed to protect her identity. If you have a story you want to share, the link is in the description. Every story deserves to be heard. If this resonated with you, leave a comment below. Would you have stayed silent and planned like she did? Or would you have confronted him the moment you knew? Subscribe to Confess to Me for new stories every week.